April 25, 2026. Washington, D.C. The Washington Hilton, the same hotel that has hosted the White House Correspondents Dinner every year for decades. A night that is, by tradition, one of the most tightly secured social events in the American political calendar. Journalists, cabinet members, celebrities, senior officials. And at the center of it, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, seated at the head table on a raised stage inside the main ballroom. Outside, layers of Secret Service, Metropolitan Police, and private security formed a perimeter that is, by design, supposed to be impenetrable. At 8:36 in the evening, that perimeter failed. A single gunshot was fired near the security checkpoint outside the main ballroom, the metal detector screening area where guests pass through before entering the event. The round struck a law enforcement officer in the chest. His bullet-resistant vest absorbed the impact. He is expected to recover. In that same instant, Secret Service agents on stage moved toward the president with the specific, practiced urgency of people who have trained for exactly this moment. Trump was rushed off the stage and moved to a secure location. The ballroom was evacuated. Hundreds of guests streamed out into the corridors of the Washington Hilton, not knowing, in those first chaotic minutes, how many shots had been fired, whether there were additional shooters, or whether the president was safe. The suspect, a 31-year-old man from California named Tomas Allen, was apprehended at the scene before he could reach the ballroom. He was in custody within minutes. The event was over, but the questions about how he got that close, what he intended, and what it means were only beginning. Tomas Allen was 31 years old and from California. Beyond those basic facts, the public picture of who he is and what drove him to the Washington Hilton on the night of April 25th was still being assembled by federal investigators in the hours and days after his arrest. What investigators confirmed early, Allen had traveled to Washington, D.C. specifically for the event. He had approached the security screening checkpoint outside the Correspondents' Dinner with the apparent intention of breaching it and reaching the ballroom. At some point during the encounter with security, the precise sequence of events at the checkpoint is part of the active investigation. A shot was fired. Whether Allen discharged the weapon or whether it discharged during a struggle with security personnel was a detail that had not been publicly confirmed in the immediate aftermath. What was confirmed? One law enforcement officer was struck. The vest held. Allen did not make it past the checkpoint. He was taken into custody at the scene without further incident. Federal prosecutors were preparing charges that, in the language of American federal law, fall under statutes governing threats to and attacks on the president and senior government officials. The potential charge being discussed publicly was attempted assassination, a federal charge that carries severe penalties. Allen's background, his online activity, his communications in the days and weeks before April 25th, all of it was under examination by the FBI and Secret Service. The motive, as of the morning after, had not been officially stated, but the target had been. U.S. officials confirmed that Allen was specifically targeting President Trump and members of his administration who were present at the dinner. The White House Correspondents' Dinner is not a casual event. It is one of the most security-intensive gatherings in Washington every year, not because the Secret Service treats it as low priority, but because the combination of a fixed venue, a large guest list of known attendees, and the guaranteed presence of the president makes it a predictable target, and predictable targets receive predictable levels of protection. The Washington Hilton has hosted this dinner for so long that its security protocols are institutional. Metal detectors, credential checks, advanced teams, uniformed and plainclothes agents positioned throughout the exterior perimeter and inside the building. And still, a gunman got close enough to fire a shot near the checkpoint. The question that Secret Service, the Metropolitan Police, and congressional oversight will now spend months examining is how. How did Allen approach the checkpoint? Did he have fraudulent credentials? Was he known to security? Was the checkpoint understaffed? Were there gaps in the outer perimeter that allowed him to reach the screening area at all? These are not questions with obvious public answers in the immediate aftermath of the incident. They are the questions that incident reviews are designed to answer, and that the American public and the journalists who were inside the ballroom will demand answers to. What is already being noted by security analysts? The fact that the officer's vest stopped the round is the detail that separates this from something far worse. The vest worked. The evacuation protocol worked. The president was protected. But the breach itself, that a man with a firearm reached a checkpoint at an event of this security level, represents a failure that will be examined intensively. For the people inside the Washington Hilton ballroom when the shot was fired, the experience began as a sound and a movement. A sharp noise. Many guests described hearing what they registered in the moment as something falling or breaking rather than immediately understanding it as gunfire. And then, the unmistakable movement of Secret Service agents. When agents move on the president with that kind of urgency, every person in the room who has ever seen that movement before understands what it means. Trump was on his feet and moving before most of the room had processed what had happened. The agents around him did what they are trained to do without hesitation and without theatrical delay. He was off the stage and through a door in seconds. The reaction of the crowd followed a beat later, a cascade of alarm moving through the room as people near the stage saw the agents move and those farther back heard something had happened. The evacuation of a room containing hundreds of journalists, government officials, and public figures, all with phones, all with social media access, many of them professionals trained to report on exactly this kind of event, happened in real time and was documented in real time. Video from inside the ballroom, captured on phones before attendees were directed out, showed the rapid departure of security personnel and the movement of the crowd toward exits. Outside, the scene was cordoned off quickly. The Washington Hilton's main entrance was locked down. Guest buses were held. The entire block was treated, in those first minutes, as an active scene. Donald Trump held a press conference in the hours after the attack. He appeared composed, defiant, in the way that he consistently presents himself in moments of personal threat, framing survival not as luck or the function of a well-trained security detail, but as something closer to confirmation. He addressed the nation from a podium and spoke about the officer who had been struck, expressing support for law enforcement in the terms he habitually uses. He spoke about the security of the event and about the response of the Secret Service. He did not speak at length about fear, because Trump does not speak at length about fear. That is a consistent element of his public persona across multiple decades in public life and 2 assassination attempt incidents. The political messaging in the aftermath of the attack was immediate and predictable in its contours. Supporters of the president framing the attack as evidence of a country in crisis and of violence directed at a legitimate leader. Critics of the president more carefully parsing the facts of what had and had not occurred. Journalists who had been in the room that night filing accounts that described the experience from the inside. The press conference itself was notable for what Trump said and for the optics. A president standing at a podium less than 24 hours after an armed man fired a weapon at an event where he was present, visibly unbowed. Whether that image serves him politically, in the way that images of him following the July 2024 assassination attempt arguably did, is a calculation that his team understood in real time. The law enforcement officer who was struck by the bullet fired at the checkpoint outside the Washington Hilton became, in the immediate hours after the attack, a name that was not yet widely known but a story that was everywhere. He was hit in the chest. The bullet-resistant vest he was wearing, standard-issue protective equipment for officers working this kind of detail, stopped the round. He was taken for medical evaluation. Officials confirmed he was expected to make a full recovery. In the narrative that coalesced around the events of April 25th, the officer's vest became a focal point, the piece of equipment that stood between what happened and something that would have been significantly worse. The conversation about protective equipment for law enforcement, about the standards and requirements for officers working high-profile security details, surfaced in commentary in the hours after the attack. It is a conversation that typically surfaces after incidents like this and then subsides. The officer himself, his name, his background, his years on the job, what he experienced in the seconds when the shot hit him. Those details were emerging slowly, filtered through official channels and through the particular privacy that injured officers in active investigations typically receive. What was already being said about him by colleagues and officials was the kind of thing that gets said about officers who take a bullet on the job and survive. That he did his job, that the equipment did its job, and that the outcome, given what could have been, was the best of bad options. He held the line. The perimeter held at the cost of one officer's brush with something that, without the vest, would have killed him. The federal investigation into the April 25th attack is, by definition, one of the highest priority law enforcement undertakings in the United States. When a weapon is discharged at an event where the president is present, every relevant agency is involved. The Secret Service, which has primary jurisdiction over the protection of the president. The FBI, which handles federal crimes including threats to the executive branch. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, which traces weapons used in federal crimes. And the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, which will prosecute the case. Tomas Allen was in federal custody. The weapon used was in evidence. The surveillance footage from the Washington Hilton, a hotel with extensive camera coverage of its public areas, was in the possession of investigators. Allen's phone, his travel records, his financial transactions, his communications, all of it was being examined under the full weight of a federal investigation that has essentially unlimited resources when the target of the crime is the President of the United States. The question of motive, what Allen believed he was doing and why, is the piece that investigators would work to establish not just for prosecution purposes, but for the broader intelligence picture, whether Allen acted alone, whether he had contact with any organized group, whether there were warning signs in his behavior that were missed. In federal cases of this kind, the investigation runs parallel to the prosecution. The charges come quickly. The full picture takes longer. The April 25th attack on the White House Correspondents' Dinner is the second time in less than 2 years that a gunman has targeted Donald Trump. The first was July 13, 2024, a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, where a shooter opened fire and a bullet grazed the president's ear. A Secret Service agent was critically wounded. 2 attendees were killed. The country watched an image that became one of the most circulated photographs in recent American history. Trump, fist raised, blood on his face, the word fight forming on his lips. What the April 25th incident adds to that record, a second incident, a different setting, a different suspect, is a question about pattern. Not in the sense that the two events are necessarily connected, because there is no evidence that they are, but in the sense that a country in which the sitting president has now been the target of armed attack twice in under 2 years is a country in which something is happening at a structural level. The security apparatus that surrounds the president is the most sophisticated in the world. It failed once in Pennsylvania and was breached again in Washington. The officer who was shot on April 25th will recover. The president was not harmed. The suspect is in custody. These are the facts as they exist right now. In the immediate aftermath, with the investigation ongoing, with the full picture still forming. What those facts add up to, politically, culturally, historically, is a question that the United States will be answering for some time.